On today's Locked On Giants podcast, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View and I are taking a look at the roster and if it is set up for success in 2024. That's coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia, Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find my written work. And as always, welcome in to my everydayers, to my Blue Crew community members, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And don't forget, if you do subscribe, to click the bell so that you are notified every time I send a new video out. And on today's show, pleased to welcome in good friend Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. And we are going to talk about the Giants roster, which continues to be tweaked, probably will be tweaked even further after we get this show done and out the door to you guys. But we'll talk about some of the decisions made. We'll talk about concerns, areas of strength, and then we're going to pivot ahead to expectations with the Minnesota Vikings coming up next weekend. So that is our agenda for today. And Ed, as always, my friend, good to see you. Thank you for coming on.
You too, Patty. Thank you for having me. And my odd looking little background that I have today. Before you start picking on me today, I've interrupted my chill time at the lake, my last stretch at the lake for the summer. I've interrupted to do your show. So before you start picking on me, just keep that in mind.
I'm speechless.
You should be.
I mean, what did I do to deserve this honor?
I'm not sure, Patty. When I figure it out, I'll let you know.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, I guess I'd better be nice to you, right? I'll try. No promises, but I'll try.
All right.
All right. Ed, let's talk about the Giants roster. I mean, the initial 53 was set. They've tweaked it a little bit since. But overall, I'm going to give you a general question to start off. How do you feel about this roster and how it's constructed?
In some ways, Patty, I think that it makes more sense to me in some ways than the roster did a year ago. At least the way that they arrived at some of the decisions tends to make more sense. Look, we can argue about, they're better here, they're worse there. It was pretty clear in some of the decisions that they made, trading Jordan Phillips, letting Jalen Mills go, keeping Bryce Ford-Wheaton as an additional wide receiver. Pretty clear that they skewed young. Pretty clear that they looked toward the future and they looked toward upside. Like I said, I think what they did makes more sense to me than what they did a year ago. So I think that's my big takeaway, I think.
Do you feel, though, that this roster can be a little bit more competitive getting out of the gate than what we saw last year?
Absolutely. And I think that for a lot of reasons, Patty, and some of that doesn't have to do with the roster per se. Although, look, Daniel Jones is healthy entering the season, and Jones is whatever Jones is. Okay. Everybody's going to have their opinion, but Jones, to me, has a chance to be more successful throwing the ball this year. He has a better opportunity entering the season, I think, than he's had most any year that he's been the Giants quarterback, because I have more faith in this offensive line. And it's clear that they have better weapons on the outside. Malik Neighbors is the first true number one wide receiver he's ever had. You've got Wan'Dale Robinson. You've got Jalen Hyatt. You've got a promising rookie in Theo Johnson. You've still got Darius Slayton. But for me, I've thought all along that their approach ever since the spring, and I think we've talked about it, their approach has been different. Their approach has been to push this team harder. They've been more physical. They've done more competitive periods than they did a year ago. And it feels to me like they're closer to being ready than they were a year ago. So I feel better about this team as we get to the start of the season.
What about in terms of matching the talent with the play callers? We're going to have a new play caller on special teams, a new play caller on defense. Brian Dable is going to take over the play calling on offense. I mean, sometimes you look at the roster makeup and the philosophies of the play caller, and sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect. Do you see any disconnects between the two?
Well, let me start, and I'm going to kind of start with special teams there. And if we're going to talk about the play callers on all three units, I loved Thomas McGahee. T-Mac was a great guy, good coach for a long time. But sometimes when you've been in a position for a long time, and T-Mac was in his second stint with the Giants, I think he had been there through 3 coaching staffs at least. I think he was hired by Shermer, if I remember correctly. So he had been through a lot of coaching staffs, and I thought T-Mac was just stale. I'm excited about Michael Gabriel. I'm excited about what I saw on kickoff return from the Giants in the preseason. So we'll see how that plays out. But he's young, he's enthusiastic. I don't know. You see him around the facility, and it's like you wonder where his skateboard is. It's like, dude, where's the skateboard? Come on, where's the how come your jeans aren't halfway down your backside? But
Oh my gosh, Ed. Making a fashion statement there.
What can I tell you? But so I'm excited about Gabriel as far as impact on special teams, which just haven't been good enough for the Giants for a few years. As for Shane Bowen on defense, I think that as everybody loves the blitz, everybody loves, let's go get the quarterback. But the problem with what Wink Martindale did is that it becomes gimmicky. It becomes, when you're not using the guy who was your best edge rusher last year in Kayvon Thibodeau, when you're not using him consistently to go get the quarterback, go get in the backfield and wreak havoc, when you're using him as a quote unquote can opener to let other people go and do things, you're not using your personnel correctly, because you're not letting your best players go and make plays. And I don't know how this is going to work out with Shane Bowen, but it feels to me like it makes more sense. You've got 2 terrific edge defenders in Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. Just let them go make plays. Let them go get in the backfield and and try to make a mess out of things. And it feels to me like that makes more sense. Now, there's always, I think, when you change a defensive coordinator, there's always somewhat of a learning curve. If this defense can create pressure, I think it can cover some of the questions that it has in the secondary. But I want to be optimistic, because to me it just makes sense to use guys to their strengths. And I'm not sure that the Wink Martindale scheme was always doing that. In terms of Dable, I'm thrilled that he's calling the plays. I think, and it's not a knock on Mike Kafka at all. I think Mike Kafka is a very good up-and-coming young coach. I still think he has a bright future in the league. I think this year is not going to help him at all, because assistant head coach is a nice way of just giving him a couple extra dollars so that he plays nice for the rest of the year. But he's been kind of slapped down by having the play calling taken away from him. But look, there's pressure on Brian Dable, and I'm not one who thinks he should be on any sort of a hot seat this year unless the Giants go 2-15. But the thing he has always done best, the reason he got the Giants job was because of his play calling, because of his creativity on offense, because of the way that he relates to quarterbacks and his ability to get the best play out of quarterbacks. And I'm a big fan of the CEO head coach, Patty. I've told you that before. But I think in this case, I think the best thing Brian Daboll can do is lean into what he does best. And so I'm glad to see him calling the plays. And I think we've seen some of that impact throughout the preseason and throughout training camp. Instead of him complaining to Mike Kafka about, get the ball down the field, we've seen plenty of get the ball down the field because he's demanding it.
Yeah, well said. Well said. All right, we are talking with Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the areas of the roster which maybe aren't as up to snuff, but how, maybe the team can alleviate some of the concerns there. So please don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, if you find that you need a mid afternoon boost, why not give 5-Hour Energy a try? 5-Hour Energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of do it yourself projects to tackle at home, take a 5-Hour Energy shot so that you can check off everything on your list. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick me up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website offers several different flavors, such as watermelon, tropical burst, grape berry, and so many more. You can build your own 12-pack or 24-pack to your personal taste and have it all sent right to your door. Visit 5hourenergy.com, and that's the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy products and save 20% off your first order when you enter the promo code LOCKEDONFB, that's Frank and B like boy, at checkout. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders either. So again, check out that website. It's 5hourenergy.com, the number 5hourenergy.com, and that promo code for 20% off is locked on FB. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, joined by Ed Valentine, a Big Blue View, good friend. And I'm trying to be nice to him so far. I think I'm doing a good job, right? I haven't picked
So
on you
far,
yet.
so good, Patty. So
all
far,
right,
so good.
Stuff. But don't forget, we still have your show, and all bets are off at that point. But anyway.
Of course.
Anyhow, speaking of which, folks, I will be on Ed's show if you want to check that out. It's always fun. We always try to do my show, then his show, and just so you get both perspectives in there. So anyway, Ed, let's talk about some of the concerns. Now, obviously, no general manager, is going to address every single thing in an off season. It doesn't happen. You have to make decisions. You have to set priorities and whatnot. The Giants, to me, and I said this on my show yesterday, the cornerback position, they've got a lot of young talent there, some of which is not quite, how can we put this, consistent or mature, however you want to put it. How much of a concern is that for you? And how surprised were you that the Giants did maybe look to add more to that group? Joe Shane saying yesterday that they made one waiver wire claim and it was a safety.
I think, Patty, it's no surprise to anybody for me to say that cornerback is the biggest question mark on this roster. It was the biggest question mark months ago, was the biggest question mark entering training camp. It's still the biggest question mark. I get what Joe Shane was talking about in terms of making only one waiver claim. And I think that what Joe was driving at was we had a list of players that we would have claimed. We had guys we were interested in, but he said teams don't let good cornerbacks go. And what he's telling us is the guys that they would have claimed didn't get put on the waiver wire. I'm still surprised that, there were one or two guys. We did a list of 9 or 10 players that could be targeted. A couple of those guys were cornerbacks. I'm still surprised he didn't claim a cornerback, but I think his point was that as an organization, they didn't feel like any of the cornerbacks on the waiver wire were better than what they already have. And he may be right. He may not be right. We'll see. But I still feel like, they need to do something there, Patty, but I don't think they're going to do anything more than really what they've already done at this point, which is keep churning the bottom of the roster, keep churning the practice squad, and see if they run into something. Maybe after week 1, we'll see a veteran signing. I don't know for sure, but they're not in a hurry to spend any of their money. But yeah, I'm as concerned as everybody else is, because even the teams with the best pass rush, you're not going to get home every time. And some of the times when you do get home, the quarterback's going to get out of the pocket and be able to get the ball down the field. And you've got to have guys who can cover. I've always said that you can never have enough quality cornerbacks. And the Giants still don't have enough.
Yeah, I mean, right now it looks like it boils down to Cordell Flott or Nick McLeod for that CB2 job. And you could probably also make the case that Deontay Banks, even though he's technically CB1, needs to, not that he was
He
bad
needs to
last year,
prove
but
it. He needs to
needs to prove it.
prove
Exactly.
that he can
So
do
that
that.
being said, I mean, let's look at that CB2 position of Flott and McLeod. Who do you think's the better option there?
I think I know which one Joe Shane prefers.
Okay.
I think he prefers Cordell Flott. I think his comment the other day was something about his comment about Nick McLeod was that he's a useful player for us in a lot of different ways. And he is a useful player in a lot of different ways, because he can play some corner, he can play some slot. I've seen them practice him at safety, and he's a terrific special teams player. And I don't think Joe Shane sees Nick McLeod as a 17-game starter at cornerback. Now, whether Brian Daboll and Shane Bowen end up seeing it that way, I think Joe said that's their decision to make. So, but I think all things considered, I think the Giants would love Cordell Flott to win that job. I don't think Cordell Flott's a bad player, Patty. I really don't. I mean, he's still the second or third youngest player on this roster, which is crazy considering that he's in his 3rd season. I don't think he's a bad player, but I still worry about the fact that he's 175 pounds trying to play on the outside. And you're at that size, you're just going to get bullied by some guys. So, and you're going to have a hard time, coming up and setting the edge and being a force in the run game. So I worry about Flott. I worry about that spot, but there's 2 things I want to say. If people want to complain that the Giants didn't draft a corner in the 2nd round, and because we know that Joe said they would have drafted a corner if one had fallen to 47. The guys they targeted came off the board at 41 and 42. And had they had the pick they sent to Carolina for Brian Burns, they could have gotten one of those guys. But I'll take Brian Burns over those 2 corners every day of the week, because he's a proven Pro Bowl, top tier pass rusher. I'll take that over the potential of a 2nd round pick any day of the week. So, so that's my stump speech on that. And the other thing is, the next person who asks me why the Giants haven't re-signed Adoree Jackson, I think is going to make my head explode. All right. Adoree Jackson earned his way out the door last year, people. Adoree Jackson made, I couldn't even count the number of business decisions Adoree Jackson made as the season wound down last year. Adoree Jackson played his way out of New York, and I would be stunned if the Giants turned back to Adoree Jackson, because it would be one thing. It would be one thing if Adoree Jackson simply had a bad year and it was clear that he gave the Giants his best effort. And I love Adoree. I've had many conversations with Adoree, and we've kidded back and forth about a few different things. And Adoree thinks he can outshoot me on the basketball court, and he probably can, but we never got to find out. But I would have liked to have given that a shot, but we'll see it. But that'll never happen. But the fact of the matter is, Adoree, the second half of last year, in my eyes, and probably in the eyes of the organization, did not give the Giants his best effort. And you can't bring a guy back when he doesn't give you his best.
By the way, I would have taken Adoree on that one. I would have paid that competition.
Yeah. He probably would have trash talked me into submission and just made me miss every shot.
Yeah, probably. Ed, what about on the offensive side of the ball? What is your biggest concern right now with the offensive side, if you have one?
Well, I mean, we can talk about running back, where all of the depth behind Devin Singletary is unproven. Everybody wants to talk about the fact that all of the guys on the offensive line, Brian Daboll was so giddy the other day about having the starting offensive line finally all on the field that he took a photo. But I'm not worried about that offensive line, about that particular part of the offensive line at all, because all of those guys are veteran players. All of those guys have been through this before. Greg Van Roten and Jermaine Illuminor have thousands of snaps side by side in games and practice. John Runyon and Andrew Thomas working together, I have no concerns about. John Michael Schmitz, I think, is going to be better in his second year. I don't know if John Michael Schmitz is going to be the 10-year answer at center, but I think the mess around him, plus being injured last year, I think affected him. But I'm not real worried about that. Honestly, the thing I think that people get worried about is what happens if they have injuries at tackle again. Because no Giants fan wants to see Evan Neal get a chance to play, unless he plays guard, where Brian Daboll says he's just not going to play because the Giants don't have they don't have a need for guards right now. But I do worry about the backup tackles a little bit, because they're still insisting that Josh Ezeudu is a tackle. I don't know if Josh Ezeudu is a tackle. We don't know what the Giants could get out of Evan Neal if he has to play. The only thing I will say about Josh Ezeudu, and I think I've said it before, the Giants, in my view, set him up to fail a year ago, because he competed all spring and all summer. He competed with Ben Bredesen and Mark Glowinski for a starting guard role. He didn't play any snaps at right or left tackle. He has played right and left tackle since the very beginning of OTAs. He's practiced there every single day. So if he's going, at least he has a chance to succeed there this year, because he's prepared to do it.
Yeah. And, hardworking kid just has to find the consistency, which I think the issue is with him. And above all, if he makes some mistakes, sometimes I've noticed he gets down on himself. And
He's really, it's confidence, and he's really hard on himself.
Mhm.
And I think he's a super sensitive kid,
Mhm.
and and unfortunately, the NFL can swallow up people like that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, coming up next, expectations. The season is about a week, little more than a week away. Opening day against the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to talk about expectations for this coming season with Ed Valentine. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans. When I'm not covering the New York Giants, I enjoy going to live events, be they concerts, plays, or other sporting events. And with the Game Time app, I never have to worry about being shut out of any event that I might want to attend. Game Time actually has a new feature called Game Time Picks, which makes getting the tickets for your favorite events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the most incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With Game Time, there are no hidden fees. You'll know exactly what you're paying for before you check out. You'll get clear images of your seat views, and you'll also get event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the tickets that you want. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Hey, Giant fans, thank you so much for making a Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and my guest today is Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and we are talking about the Giants roster, the state of the roster, a lot of good, still a few lingering questions that still need to be answered and will be answered. But Ed, let me ask you a big picture question, because this question was actually put to Joe Shane when he spoke to the media, and I want to get your take on this. Joe Shane was asked about improvement. What are you going to use as a measuring stick to say, yes, this roster is better? Yes, this organization is heading in the right direction. So I'm going to put that question to you. I mean, obviously, you can look at the wins and losses. That would be the easy answer. But to me, there's more. And, you can ask me on your show, which is fine, but what do you view as some of the biggest measuring sticks that will indicate to you that the organization is headed in the right direction?
Well, for me, one of the things, Patty, is and it's not even so much the one loss record. You go and you watch the games, and you know as well as I do that we sat through a lot of football games last year where the Giants didn't look like a professional football team. They did not look like an NFL team. They didn't have an NFL caliber offensive line. Um, they were a mess at quarterback half the time because of injuries. There was one game. I mean, Joe Shane keeps talking about the game where they had 3 practice squad guys playing on the offensive line. Um, so for me, the first thing is, are they competitive week in and week out? Do they look like they have a chance? Are they functional? Um, you know, and for me, I keep going back to so much of so much of last year made no sense to me. Just from the roster decisions that they made to, just to some of the in-season decisions that they made, to some of the play calling that that you can pick on. Of course, I hate to do that, and I try not to do that, because going back to the Kevin Gilbride days, Patty, what the answer is: a good play call is one that works, and a bad play call is one that doesn't. All right, and and that's really the bottom line. And you can complain about it any way you want. So I hate to get into play calling, but I want to see them look like a functional football team week in and week out. I want to, I'd love to see them playing meaningful football in December. But improvement, are they going in the right direction? It's so hard to define as we sit here right now. Part of it for me is, I think part of it would be, they have some winnable football games in the first couple of weeks. Can they come out of the gate and beat a Minnesota team that's already lost JJ McCarthy for the season, that has some other personnel issues, that's not going to have all of its key players, and that's a game at home. The Giants are celebrating their 100th season. They'll be celebrating the release of their top 100 players, the top 10 in that. And by the way, I wonder who's going to be number one.
Gee, I wonder who.
But get out of the gate and let's not be 1-5 to start the season. Let's look like a competitive football team, and let's not have the season thrown away, by the time we're 5 games in. So, and we'll total it up. We'll total it up at the end, and we'll see if we feel like they got better.
You mentioned earlier that you don't think Brian Daboll is on the hot seat. And I would assume that would also extend to Joe Schoen. But that being said, do you see a scenario where maybe ownership says, okay, look, we're just not getting the results. We're going to tear this down and we're going to start all over again?
Oh, absolutely. There's a scenario where that can happen. And look, I look at the Giants, and, Las Vegas odds makers will say, oh, they put the over and under at 6.5. Okay. And they went 6-11 a year ago. And I can see a scenario where they're 2 or 3 wins over that number, where they get to 9 wins maybe. And I can see a scenario where the Giants go 4-13. So obviously, if they go 3-14 or 4-13, and the offensive line is miserable, and Jermaine Illuminor is terrible, and John Runyon is terrible, and John Michael Schmitz plays the way he did last year, and none of these young players that Joe Schoen drafted, begin to really step up, because that's one of the things about the Giants this year, Patty, is they're asking a lot of young players to step into roles they haven't really done before. Like we talked about Tay Banks being the number 1 corner, Cordale Flott, if he wins the job, being a week in and week out starter at cornerback. You need John Michael Schmitz to take a step forward. I mean, the reality of it is Joe Schoen has he's drafted, I think, 4 offensive linemen at this point over 3 years. He's drafted Azudu, Marcus McKethan, Evan Neal, and John Michael Schmitz. Not one of them has turned into a good player yet. Okay. So at some point, if none of those players really begin to step up and do what you drafted them to do, if you go 3-14 and the locker room falls apart and Daboll is screaming at everybody and the assistant coaches can't stand him, and John Mara can hear him yelling at people from the second floor of the building, and players are miserable, and the players turn on the guy, yeah, then you have to blow it up. But I don't think John Mara wants to do that. I think John Mara's been down this road too many times. I think he feels like neither one of these guys has been perfect, but they're bright, capable people. And if he can at all justify letting it ride for a little while, I think that's what he would like to do.
Yeah, I think so too, because you can't keep blowing it up. And although, some people might say, well, if they go down the wrong path again, now it's an opportunity to bring in a new coaching staff, a new quarterback, and just start from scratch. But you just can't do it because you've got so much resources already invested in areas, and to start all over.
You can't keep blowing it up, because every time you blow it up, you blow up the roster.
Mm-hmm.
and you start from scratch, which means you're several years before you get to where you want to get to. And this is one of my arguments for, suppose the Giants go 6-11 again. This is one of my arguments for keeping Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll is, look, the Giants were a mess the last few years of Jerry Reese's time as GM. And people accuse me of being a Jerry Reese hater. And look, Jerry Reese was fantastic the first few years as a GM. I think he kind of coasted his way along the last few years. And, he had one view and Tom Coughlin had another view, and they didn't see things the same way. And that became a mess. And then you had the Gettleman years. And basically what you've had is a decade, maybe more than a decade now, where they sort of fell into the playoffs twice. But for the most part, for 10 or 11 or 12 years now, it's been bad. And you don't fix 10 years of bad in one off season. And it feels to me, Patty, like it took Joe Schoen the first 2 off seasons, the first 2 years of being the GM. It feels to me like it took him those 2 years just to get out from under the rock pile that was dumped on him when he took the job. And it feels to me like we are just now at the beginning of what they actually want to try to build. In some ways, it feels like year one. And it feels like we're just at the beginning of what they want to build. And if you throw, if you make them turn in their key cards, then you're starting over again, and it'll be 4 or 5 years before, before they're good again. And that's no fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wonder sometimes, how much the fact that it's the 100th anniversary, and is that going to factor in? I mean, it shouldn't, but you never know.
Well,
Obviously they made such a big deal about the 100th anniversary, which, I understand, but I think at the same time, they don't want to go out there and be embarrassed and turn in another turkey of a season.
oh, I fully understand that. And I think there is an inordinate amount of pressure on them to play a good football game week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. If they come out of, heaven forbid they come out of the chute 0-2,
Mm-hmm.
that schedule that comes up in weeks 3 through 8, oh my gosh. It's going to make for a long year if that happens. So hopefully they'll start off 2-0 and at least be able to achieve a split during that stretch, that week 3 through week 8 stretch of the season. So we will see soon enough. It's a little more than a week away. I'm sorry. Yeah, a little more than a week away. Excited about it because real football is coming back. Ed, as always, thank you so much for coming on. And Giant fans, thank you so much for tuning into the Locked On Giants podcast. We appreciate you spending part of your day with us. Be sure you check out Ed Valentine's work over on Big Blue View, as well as Big Blue View Radio. I'll be on his pod where he can abuse me if he chooses to, since I didn't go.
I know better, Patty. I know better.
Yeah,
I can't help myself sometimes, but I know better.
We'll see. But anyway, check us out. Giant fans, we will be back and see you again shortly. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.